Welcome back. In today's video, I look at the Bloody Truths video entitled How I Woke Up with 500 Up. In less than the first 30 seconds, we immediately see his channel is incorrectly named. He calls his channel The Bloody Truth, tells people to trust their senses, but also starts off with imagery like this where he claims NASA lies. But if we were to trust our senses and trust in the experiments anyone can run, the stuff in this video would be shown to be false. So it's not that he's interested in truth, he's interested in conspiracy theories. But let's continue.
Good day YouTube, and hello again to my subscribers. It occurred to me that it's been almost 2 years since I woke up to the flat earth reality.
I like the imagery of a guy falling in a pond while looking at his phone as he states he's woken up to a reality when every time a flat earther claims this, they have to deny reality to make their claims. The irony is staggering.
And although I have shared my experience with many people, I have not taken the time to share it with all of you. So there's a bit of a backstory to how I woke up, but I'll try to be brief.
He says he'll be brief, but he isn't, so I'll shorten it. He remembers back to when he was in grade 3 science and learning about the Coriolis Effect, and learning that it would affect things like baseballs on Earth.
This was somewhere between grade 3 and 5 for me, but I remember it like it was last week. Now, this was also around the same time that we were taught in school about the rotating Earth and the little thing called the Coriolis Effect. Now, they didn't teach us how the rotating Earth supposedly affects the wind directions in the two hemispheres until the first year or so of junior high school. But they did teach us that objects that are detached from the dirt surface are subject to the Coriolis Effect. To simplify that, we were taught that the Earth is rotating under any object not touching the ground. Now, to reinforce this simple concept with a visual reference, they demonstrate how this works by using a rotating body such as this. The two guys are rotating, and the one guy tosses the ball to the other. The ball goes straight, and the guy keeps on rotating. Now, this is very simple physics of the rotating Earth. So simple it can be fully understood by a grade 3 child. So simple it can be fully understood by a grade 3 child.
I said that aloud, didn't I?
You say that, but you're going to show us how badly you didn't understand it, aren't you?
The Earth continues to rotate under any object not touching the dirt surface of the Earth and traveling in any direction. Now, the reason for this backstory, and also the reason I remember it so clearly, is that as soon as we were taught this simple spinning Earth so-called fact, me, along with all my friends, all put our hands up at the same time to ask the same exact question. Does the Earth rotate under a baseball? And of course the answer was yes. So for the rest of the class, all eyes are on the clock, and as soon as that bell rang, it was a scramble for the door. We couldn't get outside fast enough to put this to the test. Well, the excitement soon faded, as we realized we couldn't notice any rotating at all. And by the end of the day, our thoughts were on to other things, never to think of it again.
What's funny is if you had actually paid attention in that class, you might have learned why you wouldn't notice any rotation. Firstly, the ball must be thrown north to south or south to north to notice the effect to its fullest. You aren't throwing a ball while standing on a spinning disc, you're on the side of a spinning ball, which does make a difference. If you throw the ball east to west, the ball will go straight and not suffer from the Coriolis effect to any measurable degree you'd see. You may have seen experiments like this, where they fire a cannonball out of a moving cannon, noting that the ball flies in a parabolic arc back into the cannon it came from. This is showing the effects of momentum and gravity on a moving object. When you throw a ball east or west, the ball already has momentum from the Earth's spin, as do you, the air around you, and everything else. Gravity and momentum will affect everything on the globe, so this parabolic arc will happen regardless of where you are, and partially minimize the Coriolis effect, but not eliminate it. The other thing to note is your throwing of a baseball isn't actually going that far compared to the Earth. Imagine we cut the globe in half a moment for the sake of illustration so I can get both these images on the screen. Here's the northern hemisphere shown from the side and from the top. If you were to stand at the equator and throw a ball northward, the ball would generally go in this direction. Keep in mind this is not to scale. I know flat earthers have a real issue with scale and can't seem to figure out how really tiny they are compared to our planet. Anyways, when viewed from above, it hasn't actually moved anywhere towards the center of the spin. If you were say halfway towards the North Pole, here, and threw your ball north, the ball would generally go in this direction. However, you're throwing at an angle, so again, when viewed from the top of the globe, your ball hasn't traveled all that far. Only when you get to the top of the globe, close to the axis it's spinning around, do you throw horizontal to the axis of rotation, and only then do you see the full effect of the spin. The further north you go, the more pronounced the Coriolis effect. You can tell from the MIT video. Here's a screenshot of the video you used. Notice the path the ball goes in? It goes in an arc. Now let's assume this is the Earth, shown from the top down, and you throw a ball northward from somewhere in the United States. Each degree of latitude is approximately 69 miles. There are 1,760 yards in a mile, and a baseball field from home plate to center field is 133 yards. That means you can fit over 913 baseball fields from one degree of latitude to another. Assuming you hit a home run with every ball, your ball wouldn't even travel 1 pixel on this image, before even factoring in the angles of your throw relative to the Earth's surface. This dot is actually more than a pixel in distance. You wouldn't see the dot on your screen unless I made it a lot bigger than a single pixel. How much of a curve do you think you'd notice if all you saw was the first 2 or 3 pixels on this image of the path of the ball? Likely none. The same is true when experimenting with it on the globe. The deviation from the Coriolis effect is very tiny and usually requires long distances and exacting measurements. 2 things you and your friends didn't do. Here's an article on Wired.com entitled Coriolis Force on a Kicked Football, where the guy actually explains the math and lays it all out for you, and runs a computer projection on a football kicked roughly northward in the United States. In it, he calculated a football kicked 50 yards would only deviate about 0.239 inches, or just under a quarter of an inch. He even has the same video you have from MIT on his page. You did your experiment as a kid throwing or hitting baseballs. You didn't know the direction the ball initially went, you just watched it sail through the air and assumed it went straight, because the amount of Coriolis effect was so minuscule you couldn't see it. And now you have a video online showing your ignorance of the effect and how it works, and proclaiming your pet conspiracy theory is somehow the truth. I'm sorry, but childhood memberberries from when you were 8 do not prove the Earth is flat despite all the mountains of evidence to the contrary.
Remember Chewbacca again? Oh, I love to remember Chewbacca. Hey, remember when there weren't so many Mexicans? Oh, I remember.
Wait, what?
Yeah, remember when marriage was just between a man and a woman? I remember. Oh, I remember.
Yeah, I remember that. Wait.
Until high school, where the rotating Earth makes another brief appearance in the textbooks in relation to wind directions in the northern and southern hemispheres. And as before, never to be thought of again.
Yes, because wind direction is affected by the effect. The amount of the effect is fairly minor on a spinning globe, but the fact there is an effect means that air currents flow in a pattern based on what hemisphere you're in, as shown in this image. Now, he goes on to explain how he got into flat earth nonsense, so I'll skip ahead some to this bit.
Now, I managed to ignore them for a while, until I seen one with the Coriolis Effect in the title by a YouTuber called The Morgile. Now, I remembered learning about the Coriolis Effect, so I clicked on the video. Now, I'm as skeptical of what I'm told as anyone, but what this guy presented in his video was nothing short of an instant migraine. He first reminded me of what I learned about the rotating Earth in school, and as far as my memory served me at the time, he was absolutely correct. And then he showed me how and why he knew for himself that what we are told is our spinning ball reality is in fact not our reality.
So, you watched a video claiming to be skeptical, and I'm assuming it's the one shown in this clip, where the author shows a flawed model of gravity in our globe, and rather than going, this guy seems to be saying something that goes against all the evidence we have concerning this topic, I should check this stuff, you just went with it? It was easier to assume a giant, multi-government conspiracy to fake the shape of our globe from as far back as 240 BC, when we first figured out we were on a spinning ball using sticks and shadows, and that said conspiracy lasted over 2,000 years, such that governments had to fake space travel to cover it up. That was easier than the idea that the Morgile's crackpot theories might be wrong. Sure, Bloody Truth, I can totally believe this opened your eyes.
My eyes are open.
Now, I know what you're thinking. This guy is no skeptic if one video on YouTube has him convinced of anything.
Exactly, I am so glad we see eye to eye on this.
Well, not only was I skeptical of this Morgile dude, but I was skeptical of myself and my recollection of what I actually learned in school about the rotating Earth. So, I found this. The Teacher's Guide to Teaching the Coriolis Effect.
Why am I worried you got a hold of the teaching materials and as an adult you still do not understand it?
Because the Earth turns. Brought to you by the American Meteorological Society, backed by the National Science Foundation. Now it pretty much says it all right here on the first page of the introduction to the Coriolis Effect. Let's start from the top. Now it talks about wind and ocean currents and then goes on to say, other objects, including planes and boats, freely moving horizontally almost anywhere on Earth, except at the equator, turn left or right. The turning of these moving objects' paths, as seen from our vantage point on Earth, is the Coriolis Effect. Why does this curved motion occur? Now, I would like to stop here just for a moment. Who has ever witnessed this apparent curving motion, and where is it and the calculations required to account for it ever been recorded and documented in a professional scientific manner and presented to the public with practical, testable, and repeatable experiments? I'm just saying.
The Bloody Truth? Here's a PDF entitled A Brief History of the Coriolis Effect, where the authors explain briefly how we came to understand the effect. They even include the math for it and the experiments done. The earlier article on the kicked football has the math right in it. And just for fun, here's a paper where the authors prove the spin of the Earth using the Coriolis effect, and they provide all the math. I have provided links to all of these in the description. And for an experiment you can do yourself, here's gentleman physicist video Foucault's Pendulum, Watch the World Turn, where he shows how to calculate your latitude on the globe using the Coriolis effect on a swinging pendulum. I won't show his conclusion, but I will show his intro. To watch the full video, you can find the link in the description. He explains the full experiment, all the math, everything. I'm sorry, but the issue isn't that this information doesn't exist, it's that you didn't look for it. This took me 10 minutes with Google. I mean, hell, the wiki page on the Coriolis effect has the math on it, for crying out loud. For you to be this ignorant of the subject matter is just plain baffling. Seriously, why can't the Bloody Truth bloody read?
Damn it, why won't it read?
Okay, so moving on. Aren't objects that are moving freely in horizontal directions supposed to move in straight paths? As described by Sir Isaac Newton's first law of motion, an object in motion should remain in motion in a straight line unless acted upon by an outside force. But there is no force acting on an object moving freely across the Earth's surface to cause it to turn right or left. Yet, except at the equator, the moving object is apparently deflected. Again, I challenge anyone to provide proof of these observations.
We have. Again, it's documented. Thoroughly. You just haven't looked. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a bit because he's reading the introduction and getting annoyed that it says stuff he doesn't like, and that he thinks he disproved when he was 8. And instead move on to this part of his video.
Now, here's where you need to start thinking for yourself, okay? If what we are taught as children, while we are too young to know enough about the world to even consider it to be questionable, if what we are taught is true, just as we would have to believe it to be so because it tells us so right here in this book of science that is specifically designed to educate teachers just as much as the students on the facts and the physics of flying over a rotating Earth. If all of this is true, then a helicopter would only have to hover and wait for its destination to rotate to it from the west. Right?
I wish you'd read more than the introduction. I really do. I'll post a link to the page you're reading from in the description, but I will save people the trouble because the answer to this dumb question isn't in there. A helicopter is flying under power. It stays in the same position because the pilot keeps it there. Wind currents, Coriolis Effect, and various other forces act upon a helicopter. It doesn't just magically float there. I mean, just watch this guy firing off a bunch of pull-string helicopters. Do any of them go straight up and straight down? Now, this video is by Granddad is an Old Man, who decided to play with toy helicopters to see if he can use their propellers in his homemade drone, and has nothing to do with the Coriolis effect. I only show it to point out the reason a helicopter hovers in one spot is because of the pilot.
Now think. Think real hard. Because according to this educational document, brought to you by the American Meteorological Society and supported by the National Science Foundation, the helicopter would indeed be detached from the Earth, and the Earth would immediately begin to rotate under it. Am I wrong?
Yes, you are wrong. It doesn't say that, and the only reason you think it does is because you don't understand the subject matter or how helicopters work. Please, please, read more than the intro. I swear if you haven't moved past the intro before finishing this video, I will need more than a soccer bopper to protect my face from the facepalm to follow.
Soccer bopper, you can sock all day and bop all night.
So this is about the time when the Globe Defenders in the chat threads will try to say that, oh, it's all relative, or maybe they will say the atmosphere is tattooed to the Earth. Okay, well, if any of that horse shit is true, then why teach about a Coriolis effect at all?
Because the Coriolis effect functions in small-scale experiments, and it helps us to understand the parts of our globe that are noticeably affected by this effect, like weather patterns. That's why it's the Meteorological Society publishing this PDF you're reading off of, and not a physics journal.
Okay, everything would be relative, and the apparent curved linear path of an object detached from the Earth and moving freely while the Earth rotates under it would not be a thing at all, now would it? So like I said, folks, you have to learn to think for yourself.
You did! You bloody hell did! You moved on and didn't even read the damn thing. Ow! 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 Damn it! You're reading an educational primer by a meteorological society trying to promote Project Atmosphere. As your primer states, Project Atmosphere has created and trained a network of resource agents who provide nationwide leadership in pre-college atmospheric environment education. This primer is there to teach kids about how the Coriolis effect affects the weather, not how it affects anything else. If you'd read it, you'd know that. The beginning and ending of your education on the subject seems to be what you learned in 3rd grade, and I'm sorry, but your 3rd grade education is not up to actual research. Had you bothered to even Google the Coriolis effect, you'd find the wiki page I mentioned earlier as the first hit result. It has the math you want and mentions the experiments you want, though not in detail. Other resources online, like I mentioned, give those experiments you want. The only reason to be this poorly informed on this is for you not to be skeptical, but instead cling to your preconceived notions and refuse to even do the most basic of research.
An eastbound flight on a passenger jet is only capable of an average airspeed of about 600 miles an hour. And the Earth is rotating at 1,037 miles an hour at the equator. How are eastbound flights even possible if the Earth rotates under a detached object, such as a plane, faster than the plane itself can travel?
The plane, the air it's flying through, and the ground below, it's all spinning at the same rate. It's called relative motion. The plane isn't detached from everything, it's moving through a moving medium. Worse, it's under power, which means the pilot can make corrections to correct for the minor amount of difference that the Coriolis effect would cause. Worse, it's affected by
gravity, you fucking retard! Gravity! Have you ever heard of fucking gravity? Gravity! Gravity!
Objects on the planet are pulled towards it by gravity. They have momentum from the spin of the globe and are constantly being pulled towards it by gravity. Gravity tends to affect objects far more than the Coriolis effect. Do you remember those cannonball experiment videos I showed earlier? If you notice, they need a funnel to make this work.
So here's the golf ball. I'm going to fire the gun now. Close. Close. Perhaps it would help if we give it a little bit of leeway. There goes the gun. Here comes the ball. And this is just in case.
It's because the ball doesn't come down exactly where it came from. This is partly due to the imperfections in the firing mechanism and ball, and also partially because of the Coriolis effect. That's how minute the effect really is.
And why are the flight times almost identical in any direction, directly relative to distance and airspeed, plus or minus head or tailwind?
The Coriolis effect has an effect on the air the plane flies through, creating slight wind difference, but air currents have more impact on a plane's movement than the Coriolis effect. The head and tailwinds you mention is the Coriolis effect's actual impact on the speed of the plane, you twit. For more info, here's a flight instructor explaining this for you. But you'll probably claim this is all fake because said instructor works at NASA.
These are questions you need to answer for yourself, I guess. But I've come to the conclusion that if there are no logical scientific experiments that are easily testable, repeatable, and verifiable, and there are no easy to explain and unquestionable answers to the questions at hand, and the scientific community pushes assumptions as facts and theory as reality through the education system, such as a rotating Earth without one shred of testable proof, then I simply cannot allow myself to believe the Earth is rotating.
You had the information. You had it in your grasp.
Your knowledge is only overshadowed by your stupidity, Starscream.
You just had to Google it. Do even the most basic research. But you couldn't be bothered, could you? Seriously, why can't the bloody truth bloody read? Now, he goes on claiming he can't detect the curve over land or sea, again showing his lack of understanding, but I'm going to stop here because that facepalm hurt a lot more than I thought it would. If you enjoyed this video, remember to mash that like and subscribe button. If you enjoy this content or have requests for future videos, leave a comment or send me a message. If you want to be kept up to date on when I post videos, feel free to follow me on Facebook and Twitter. And as always, I will see you next time.